Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where we share ideas from experts to manage money in the home as teammates. Today's topic is From the Federal Reserve to Budgeting with His Spouse, a Modern Husband's Journey. Our guest is Lorenzo Amani, who is the Vice President, Compliance Officer at Industrial Bank. Prior to joining Industrial Bank, he served as a policy advisor in the Office of Consumer Policy at the U.S. Treasury Department and as a senior consumer compliance bank examiner at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Mr. Amani is ABD status for his Ph.D. in Public Administration and Public Affairs at Virginia Tech. He serves on the Modern Husbands Advisory Board along with his wife, Aliyha. Enjoy the show. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you guys today.
So if you wouldn't mind, could you share with our listeners your educational and your professional journey?
So I'll start with academics first. I graduated from high school in Fayetteville, North Carolina, went to Westover Senior High School. I earned a football scholarship to Virginia Tech, where I played defensive back for a couple of years until I had an injury. Ultimately, I graduated with a degree in consumer affairs and another degree in sociology. That's when I kind of honed in my passion of just learning more about the world around me, and with an explicit focus on consumerisms, and some of the challenges that consumers face in the market. And so being a former athlete, I went to Arizona State for grad school to work as a graduate assistant in the athletics department there. And that's where I pursued my master's in higher education and post-secondary administration, because I felt like I wanted to work with former student athletes like myself to figure out life after sports, right? Because when I injured my foot my third year at Virginia Tech, it was really devastating for me, psychologically, physically, especially considering that I didn't play as much as I wanted to. Got a full scholarship at Virginia Tech. This is the era when Frank Beamer was there. Yeah. So, we guys are going to the league. We were very successful. So I was really, really down about not being able to live up to my own expectations of performing on the field. So as I, took my education and went off to Arizona State to live with a friend who was playing for the Arizona Cardinals, I wanted to pour into student athletes. And fast forward, as I was going through my master's program and working with student athletes, I started to realize that there were some information gaps for myself, as in I wanted to help people and really help people, but there were some times where I felt like I didn't know how to help people, or there were some gaps in information. Like I didn't know a particular part about business or economics, the economy, politics. So I was like, you know what, I need to learn more. And so that kind of drove me to going back to Virginia Tech, and I got into a Ph.D. program, Public Administration and Public Affairs. This is 2015, 2016. I did it part-time while working full-time. And then I started to get a feel, and along the way, I'm working jobs in either in higher ed or in HR, because I had a passion for helping people. So mostly academic, but I'm throwing in a little bit of the professional work there. And so I decided to go to grad school full-time to make more progress on my PhD program, and also open up my summer so I can intern and get exposure to different areas of what I was studying. So my first summer, I went to the Federal Reserve Board and I interned. I learned more about the Community Reinvestment Act, consumer compliance, the Fed, the payment systems, international banking, so many things I learned at the Fed. It was such an incredible opportunity for me to get exposure. And then the following summer, I did it again, but that's when I met my wife. We were both at the Fed in the summertime. And so we met, and then 9 months later, we got married. That's another story, but I'm sure we'll incorporate that later in the conversation. And so academically, as of right now, I'm in the dissertation phase because I've been afforded fantastic opportunities in the market to grow and to learn. So I've worked at the board, I've worked at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. Well, let me clarify what the board is. That's the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. And so I've worked at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, the U.S. Treasury Department, and now I'm at Industrial Bank as the VP Compliance Officer. And so, in the last 5 years, I've had several roles that focus primarily on community and economic development, the Community Reinvestment Act, and consumer compliance and banking, and miscellaneous topics that kind of fit in between climate change and household financial resilience, fair credit reporting, and a number of things. So that is
that all?
That is my academic and professional background. I try to do my best to stay on track, so sorry.
No, I mean that is so impressive. That is quite the rundown. That's what I'm saying. Is that all you do? Like I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, when I hurt my foot, that really shook me because I felt like I didn't live up to my potential, and I've always been a competitive person. And I did Junior Olympics when I was in middle school and high school, so it was hard for me to what's the best way to say it? Because it wasn't a crash. It was a low period because I felt like a failure in a way, and so like I wanted to make a difference in the world and find myself, and I found myself in the work that I've been engaged in.
I mean, it's an incredible journey. Yeah. Do you mind if I ask how you persevered through that, like that low point, how you kind of overcame that and, I mean, started that journey?
I definitely had my own, adversity. I wasn't new to adversity, right? In sports, you lose some, you win some, injuries come and go. But that was the most devastating injury. And I had to make a decision like at 20 on whether or not I would continue to play football or take a medical red shirt and end my collegiate football career, meaning that I could never play again. And my whole thing was, it became really simple. Is that like, Zoe, do you want to be able to walk and run outside for a casual jog when you're 40? Or do you want to have foot complications for the rest of your life? And I was like, you know what, let me just step away from it. I got a full scholarship. And so I had to have a dose of humility, knowing that, all right, I got a full scholarship. I'm still going to keep my scholarship with this injury. A lot of people don't even have that. I've had a lot of experiences as a student athlete at a Virginia Tech. A lot of people don't have that. You know what I'm saying? So I had to count my blessings, but persevering while some of my friends were signing $1 million contracts, but some weren't, right? So it's not like I was losing anything while others were gaining. It was a matter of like, okay, I have to reset. And because my whole life revolved around sports, I had to figure out what that reset was, but I was committed to it. So, but also it wasn't just me. I had a lot of people pour into me and give me advice and just sit down and listen to me talk about what I wanted to do. And they gave me their perspectives. People that gave me my first internship in the athletics department, my senior year was great. So there were a lot of people who gave me direction along the way. So it wasn't just an individual effort for sure.
It's such an incredible, mindset that you have, but it's an incredible journey. I mean, it's clear that you've done a lot, you've learned a lot, you've gone through all this education, all this training, all this, real world experience. So, I mean, for our listeners, kind of coming back to, our normal financial literacy conversations here, what professional hacks do you apply to your own budgeting process that maybe our listeners can take away?
So when you say budgeting hacks, what exactly do you mean? Just like tricks, tips?
Yeah, tips, tricks.
Yeah.
What have you learned? I mean, it's been an interesting, I think, journey through just through your different degrees, through your different experiences. I mean, what are those tips, tricks, for the budgeting process?
And we were talking about this before too, Zoe, of how, through particularly your work at the Fed, and now you're in compliance, like you would take these models, these ideas that you saw,
right.
And you saw how they were applicable to managing money at home. And, we had a separate conversation with you or with Aliyha about how you all work together to manage money. And she's also brilliant. And it was fascinating to hear about how you two are working together right now. So for the everyday listener who doesn't know what compliance is, as an example, or
right.
things that you would do in the Fed where it would translate into a home budget. Could you perhaps connect those dots and then describe what you do, and with the goal that our listeners maybe take some of this advice and use it in their own household?
Absolutely, I can do that. Several things came to mind, so I wanted some direction. So
yeah.
A lot of different spaces.
We want to hear it all. We want to hear it all. So.
I would just start, just to respond to your question about what professional budgeting hacks and financial literacy tips and tricks do I engage in. I will say this, first of all, when I was a full-time graduate student, so going through different transitions where there's lesser income, more income, or there's pauses in income is really important. Just going from undergraduate on a scholarship, maybe interning, and then go on to be a graduate assistant. The pay is low, but the experience is very rewarding. And then working along the way, and then going back to school full time and just living off of GA. So I've had several, it's been up and down with like my income and steady income. And in different periods, I've had to like really pull back on spending and be very frugal, and take advantage of discounts, the free lunches, all those different things, Goodwill when I needed a good suit or something. And
a GA, I had the same situation. It pays like nothing, right?
Yeah, and working part-time to supplement income. And there's been a lot of people along the way that helped me out. I've been able to live with people in certain ways, but I would just say it's important to note that we all go through these ebbs and flows, or where our income fluctuates, especially, if you're in graduate school or even undergraduate, depending on your family's support system, scenario. So yeah, throughout those phases, I've learned to be frugal and to do more with less. And I've also learned, which is my second point, risk management, just making sure that I have, even if I was in grad school, just make sure I have a little bit of savings, that savings, or just money stashed away, or I would keep like $300 cash, stashed away. It's not much, right? But you're making like $1,000 a month, $300 stashed away for an emergency or some unexpected expense is helpful. And
life saving.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And I would use my credit cards very minimally. I wouldn't do too much. I would always try to maintain a low balance, so I had some flexibility with my credit limit. And then let's see, with my career as a risk management professional.
But before you go on, you brought up a really good point, because you're really just talking about income volatility.
Right.
And over the past like 15 years, we've seen an explosion of that in American households, where the days of just steady paychecks and pensions, they're gone for the most part. And now there is a significant percentage of the population, I think it's around 40%, who experience a monthly change in income of around 30%. So that in itself is significant. And so budgeting with a spreadsheet and thinking that all the numbers are always going to be the same, that's not the case anymore. So I'm glad you brought up the fact that, hey, I had to take a third of what I was expected to get paid and tuck it away, because if something happened, I could then use it, so I'm not living on my credit card.
Right.
So I just didn't want to move past that without addressing how important that was. So you were saying, you're talking about compliance and what you learned there.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, that's a great point. And I see that as risk management, right? And that connects directly to what I do as a risk manager, consumer compliance, managing the risks of a financial institution, making sure that we're following all the rules and regulations set forth by state and federal government entities. And a lot of that is making sure that we don't do harm to the consumer. But in my mind, I think about harm to me as an individual, like just, all right, if part of my 10-year journey was risk and reward, right? And trying to understand, if I take low pay while I'm in graduate school, but I'm getting an education, although I might be making less money now, there might be more employment opportunities and income growth opportunities in the future. So let me be prudent, let me be frugal for a couple of years, and then, my income and my opportunities will come, and then I can spend more money. And so there were a lot of phases that I went through, still going through those phases as my income changes when I change jobs, and as things in the market shift, as my spending habits shift. But yeah, like you were saying, it's great to put a little bit away, because, if an unexpected expense happens, what usually happens is that your monthly expenses stay the same. Like your Verizon bill doesn't go down. Yeah. You're tired, you got a flat tire, and you got to come out of pocket for a flat tire.
Right.
All those fixed expenses don't come down. So you can easily go into a situation where you're just going into the negatives, which is something I didn't want to happen, because most of my time I was by myself and trying to make things happen. But I will say this about, I had a job at Virginia Tech while I was working in the budget office. And one of the things they used to always say was that, we got to have these budget conversations on a monthly, bi-weekly basis. And nobody really wants to have this conversation, like just talking about the different departments at the university. Nobody wants to be told that they have to cut their spending or maintain their spending. It's always like, hey, we have great ideas and we need more money to fund these new ideas. And so for me, I really learned that, hey, it's important to have the budget conversation, especially when you don't want to have the conversation. But
That's
more
when you need to have it. It's especially when you need to have it, when you don't want to have it.
exactly.
And that could be tough to do with a partner or a spouse who hasn't had the same experiences, right?
Right. And what I learned is that, yeah, to have those conversations, you need to have them like pretty frequently and consistently. So there's managed expectations. And that is very hard to do, even for myself. And that's something I try to incorporate even at home with my wife. And my wife, she's great. We have our monthly conversations. We have our spreadsheets that we use, and we're pretty good at keeping track of what we do. We're getting better at it. And that's what I would encourage all listeners to do. Start somewhere with tracking your spending and do a basic budget and just start to build it out every month. Don't feel like you have to have this perfect dynamic, 20-page Excel spreadsheet budget to get going. Start with a little bit, track some of the basics, and then just add a little bit on and just try to be consistent along the way. Because, a 2-year journey of developing a budget and developing budgeting habits and having a conversation with yourself or your spouse or wherever you're with, that's better than not having those conversations or not trying to do it for 2 years, because you can really change the trajectory of your finances by getting into a habit.
I have 2 quick follow-ups that I'm just excited to ask because I want to know the answer. First of all, you lived in DC at the time when you were going through this, right? When you and Aliyha were together and you had to manage the potential of income volatility. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I moved a lot in the last, decade. But yeah, in the last 5 years, we were in the DMV area.
So DC is it's not necessarily an inexpensive place to live, as I understand it. And my understanding of the importance of managing income volatility is very simply to have in a savings account what you need to smooth out income volatility or expense shocks. But in addition, you've got to keep, as you're saying, your fixed costs low. An auto loan payment or rent, as an example. How were you able to find a pretty good deal in DC and to be able to rent and live and be able to keep your expenses relatively low, your fixed expenses?
There's a long answer to that question. I'll just say, yeah, that we lived in several places in the DMV, and the pandemic really shifted things for us because we moved out further, probably further than we would have if the pandemic hadn't happened. But we usually found decent deals. It was just a matter of, I started out, my salary was lower. Well, my salary was decent. My wife was in grad school full time for a couple of years. And so, I mean, we managed so many different phases where, I was making more money while she was in school. She was making more money. We're both working. I'm changing the job. She's changing the job. Her income goes up. Her income mellows out. It goes back up. Mine goes up. And so we've had to manage several different scenarios over the last 5 years.
And there's one more follow-up because we had talked about this earlier, and I thought to myself, wow, our listeners need to hear this. How you and Aliyha, your wife, decided to be able to manage credit in a way where it maximized your opportunity to get, I think it was a mortgage, right? Because you understood really like what you needed to do with credit products because of your experience in banking to have the kind of credit score that was necessary to get an optimal loan. Can you maybe share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so because I was a bank examiner at the Boston Fed and I knew the nuances for securing a mortgage, because I was reviewing home mortgage applications and making sure that banks followed the necessary procedures when extending home loans, I was able to be really savvy in securing a mortgage for a condo in DC at a time when there was a lot of market fluctuation. Some people, I mean, when we bought the condo in the end of 2021, a lot of people didn't realize that the condo market wasn't as hot as the, single family home market. And especially in DC,
Yeah.
I wasn't just looking at it as a place for us to live. I was also looking at it as an investment and a learning opportunity to get deeper into my knowledge base of real estate. But me knowing that, all right, I worked at the Fed, I do this work all the time. Me knowing that interest rates were going to rise and they were going to rise for the next year or so at least. I was like, well, I need to go ahead and lock this interest rate that I can get in now. I'll get this condo. The seller gave us seller credits. And so that basically reduced the down payment cost. We were able to get down payment assistance as well because our salary at the time was under a certain threshold. So we got a great deal. Just me knowing all the different nuances, first, basically the specific nuances to buying a home and navigating the home buying process, to the macro understanding of understanding where the Fed is positioned, where inflation was likely to go. And this was still like the second year of the pandemic. So there was a lot of uncertainty, but I was able to, kind of focus in using the micro knowledge on home ownership and the macro knowledge of the economy to make a good decision for us.
So want to kind of transition to a different part of the conversation. Obviously, as modern husbands, we focus on just the new norm. The new normal is in most households, majority of households in the United States, there's dual income. And in 38% of households, a woman earns more than, the wife earns more than the husband. But that's not necessarily the same every year. So as you were sharing your story, obviously your story is representative of so many couples in America where you're taking turns on, who's doing what and earning power, et cetera. And what's necessary for us as husbands or as partners is to support our partners or our wives' career ambitions, which is a lot more than just being a cheerleader, congratulating them for a promotion. What does that mean for you? And what specifically do you do to make sure that Aliyha continues to be successful? Who's at ExxonMobil, is that right?
Aliyha, she's a tax attorney at ExxonMobil. And yeah, like you said, we've had several scenarios where our incomes fluctuated. But you're right, the support is really important. And for us, the money, who was making more money never really mattered. It's just about our collective. It was more about getting the opportunities to put us on a path of sustainable financial freedom, or I wouldn't, maybe not freedom, because even you could be a millionaire and still have debt, right? But I would say just financial stability is better, right? That financial stability where we can actually get to a point where we're building wealth, right? So for us, it wasn't about who can make the most money now to get there. It was about how can we get the best opportunity career-wise and to master it and to do well, build relationships so we can put ourselves on a career track to a path of financial stability, right? Where we can earn income and have a decent life together. And so for me, that looks like, okay, I was changing jobs, trying to find the right opportunity and, accelerating my professional growth. For her, it was wrapping up her MBA, her JD, and going to big law, then going to ExxonMobil. And I would say along the way, we support each other by talking about our challenges, especially with her when she has questions about how to navigate some people things. I might chime in and give her some perspective, or if she's concerned about something, I might, encourage her to think about it another way, to find peace in her mind about it. Sometimes we talk ourselves into more complex situations than the reality of the situation. I'm guilty of that as well. So yeah, we talk through a lot of different scenarios, and our circles are very similar. So oftentimes we'll know some of the same people, but we definitely encourage each other, especially on our toughest days, for sure.
She was on a previous podcast, or I guess it depends on the order we've pre-recorded it, but she and Dr. Heyman both shared how they felt supported by their spouses. And so Aliyha was giving you a lot of credit, talking about the fact that sometimes, they don't, when she came home after a particularly stressful day in big law, she doesn't want her problems solved. She just wants to unload and vent. And it was funny as she was saying that, Christian was trying not to smile too widely because, that was the same thing that his wife, Dr. Heyman, needs to do. But then she also, brought up the fact that how organized you are at home, which it sounds like it's her, where there's very specific tasks to manage the home, the typical chores, and it's broken down into categories and who does what. And she said there's clarity, so there's no confusion, there's no fights. Can you share just a little bit about that? Because as she was sharing that, I was like, wow, I can see how everything seems to be smooth sailing.
Yeah, we've had our bumps, right? We've had our challenges, don't get me wrong, but we are both fairly well organized people. We need that, both of us. We need it. And yeah, there were times where she wanted to just get stuff off her chest, after a long day. Yeah. And for me, my response was to listen, but I was in, okay, how do we fix this? So tomorrow you don't have the same issue, or next week you don't have the same issue. So I'm definitely, good at listening to her, discuss her challenges, but also I was in it, okay, in the mindset of how do we fix this? I was listening with the intent to fix, listening just to listen, because because of all the people that I've helped and all the things that I've done, I'm just thinking about, okay, I'm a problem solver, right? How do we solve the problem? Because this is not just a conversation, a casual conversation. This is a conversation where you're getting stuff off your chest. This is a challenge. How do we solve your challenge? And, I'm not sure how successful I was at that. I'll leave that up to Aliyha to speak about, but
No, you need credit. She said that, you eventually became a good, all men do the same thing. I shouldn't say that. Most men do the same thing. We try to solve problems right away. But ultimately, your partner, your wife, they can't think straight when all they see is red because they're so angry with whatever's going on, right? So that part of your brain that's primal, where it's just pumping emotion into your thoughts, it needs to come out. So you can, shift your thinking back to, the thinking part of your brain. And when you work at a high stress job, there's nobody to let that out. You can't, and if you can't let that out, you can't think clearly.
Yeah. But for me, sometimes I try to set expectations and simplify things, because sometimes we get into our head that these are really complex scenarios, we get overly emotional. So I try to help her understand, like, some of these challenges are really simple. You got to simplify it. If you don't simplify it, then you'll get worked up about perceptions people may or may not have about you. You might get worked up about an assignment that was 5 minutes late, So yeah, I definitely understand, like, there's this process of listening and just letting people vent and get it out. But I'm also like, wait, let's talk about how you see this scenario and try to simplify it, because it might not be what you think it is. And you spent your whole day worrying about it. And then you come home and you tell me for 2 hours what the scenario is, but I'm already processing that, hey, maybe let's talk about how you perceive this. Because a lot of times, high stressful jobs is all about perception.
Yeah.
It's about how you perceive the conversation you have to have with your manager about a deadline, or having those difficult conversations. But because I grew up playing sports and I've had arguments and difficult conversations with coaches that are 20 or 30 years older than me, I've had difficult conversations with people way younger than me. Bruce, you're in academia, right? I'm in a Ph.D. program. So I've had difficult conversations with my peers in grad school, with faculty members in grad school. So for me, that the discourse is a normal part of the human experience. It's a normal part of working on a team for me. But sometimes in my wife's case, it was like something to avoid or something to be stressed out about. And my thing is just like, look, have the conversation. Just have the conversation. Try to be open and honest. Try to listen to others. Because sometimes, and so I'm like more of a people person. Aliyha is more of like an introvert too. So that's like how our personalities differ. And so I'm more of like, hey, it's just your manager. Tell them what you think. And she's like, no, I got to think about what I need to say, and I'm not sure how they'll take it. So I definitely encourage her to just talk to people, be yourself, and try to troubleshoot with people. And it's not always going to be pretty, but the more you talk, the better things go. My point.
To bring it back kind of full circle, even to the beginning of our talk today, I mean, it's having those difficult conversations. You start talking about even like with your budgeting process, you got to have that budget conversation, even when you don't want to.
Yes.
So it's putting yourself out there, having those conversations, getting through it. And maybe when you don't want to have it, that's the time to have it too. So, with all of these podcasts, we always like to kind of end with maybe one piece of advice that you can give to our listeners that they can take away. So if we had to boil down, what's your one piece of advice that our listeners can take away today?
I would say this: put a plan together. Just try to put a plan together. Like, what is the financial plan for your life? What does that look like? And start documenting that somewhere, Google Doc, Word Doc, Excel spreadsheet, and just stay committed to building that over time, because it often serves as it'll be a roadmap, but it also serves for me as I do this as a great reference point if I get off track. Like I can go back to my notes from last year and look at when my credit card balance was way too high and I felt uncomfortable about it.
Mm.
Maybe I'm making more money a year later, but that looking back at that note from the last year will kind of humble me and say, hey, you know what? You're a little too loose with your credit card. Maybe instead of, putting more money in your credit card, try to save more or try to adjust spending because you have more flexibility doesn't mean you need to spend more. So I would just say have that start somewhere with and put a financial plan together, try to document it, and it'll be a roadmap for your future, but it'll also be a great reference point as you move forward to kind of ground you in your journey, your financial journey, that is.
So thanks for your wisdom today. It was a really great conversation.
No, thank you all. I want to do the reverse of this one day where I can learn from you all and learn more about your stories.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that. Thanks, so. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcasts and share the Modern Husbands podcast with your friends. A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Please be on the lookout for new and exciting announcements on modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.